When you eliminate the improbable, the impossible, and the impractical, and the truth still stands. So, I personally have done the math, applied the logic, measured out the geometry, and then added reason, and I must tell you, the equation still comes out the same. And frankly, not only have my eyes deceived me. It is January 7, 2016 at 5:30 p.m. on the dot. And I am introducing to those new to the subject a major crusader of truth, Mark Sargent. Now he, along with Eric Dubay, Rob Skiba, to make noteworthy, are at the very forefront of the most explosive discussion, more like a concussion on the world today, that has the potential of literally turning the world as you know it upside down, just to start with. Now, Mark Sargent is engaging, erudite, rapid in intelligence, and understanding completely on this subject, but also, and noteworthy, is willing to back away from an untruth. Recognize the deception as well as being willing to ferret out reality wherever it exists. He has a great radio voice and presence. I feel honored to just speak with him, and to have him on my first broadcast session for YouTube is rather mind-blowing to me. I'm asking Mark to talk about what he wants to, say things beyond other interviews just to start with, and how the subject is changing the world. And the best way to introduce this subject is, I understand, by asking a question and not saying we're going to talk about this subject. So ask me a question, if you would, Mark, that might make me help you introduce the subject.
Sure. And by the way, thank you very much for having me. And I'm sorry if my my radio voice isn't 100% tonight. I just had an appendectomy.
Yes.
Surgery. I had my appendix taken out a week ago, and so the tubes they jammed down my throat are still rubbing me a little wrong. But to your question, the question I put forth to everyone, including the entire internet, is how do you know you are where you think you are? Meaning, how do you know you live on a globe? And it seems like a fairly simple question. Mm-hmm. So when I put that to you, you would probably come back, and the question's kind of rhetorical for me, because everybody answers either one of two ways, without fail. The first way is, well, we're on a globe. Everybody knows that. It's a given, like gravity or water or fire. We know the globe has been in our classroom. I saw it when I was in first grade. It's a globe. And then I come back and I say, okay, other than the model that's been in the corner of your classroom for all those years, how else do you know? And then you come back and say, well, NASA told us. NASA showed us the picture. I go, yeah. They showed you one picture. In fact, they only had one picture from 1972 until July of 2015. So if all your faith is being put in NASA, is it well founded? You got to remember, they're a military wing of the United States government, founded on the still burning embers of the Nazi war machine, and that's a lot of faith. And when you go back and look at them closely, there's a lot of things missing there that should be the given you're looking for. So I don't know if that's a good enough question to start, but that's usually what I lead with.
That is excellent and goodly. And what I find most fascinating is not just about the NASA, but also about the measurement of ships disappearing into the horizon, which it's not true. Back in the time of my ancestors, no one had a telescope. We do today. And so we set the telescope, and no, it has not disappeared anywhere. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, the high-end cameras, the one bad thing about technology, if you're trying to control the world from an authority standpoint, and when I say authority, I mean usually three groups, the super rich, the royals, and the governments. And that is, the problem with technology is it's going to permeate into certain places, and there's no way you can stop it. So once computers got small enough that you could fit, a full-blown PC into a phone, well, you could also put a full-blown PC into a camera, a high-end camera, and give cameras abilities they didn't have even 10 years ago, including super zoom, like the Coolpix P900 or whatever that thing that came out with, just a monster zoom. And so basically, you go to the beach and you look out, and with just your naked eyes, you can see about 3 miles, and you see ships disappearing into the distance. You think they're going over the horizon, because that's what you've been told. But then you whip out your zoom camera or your phone or whatever you've got with super zoom capability, and you zoom in on this ship, and now it's there again. And it disappears because it's gone out of your range. Well, if you had a more powerful telescope, you'd be able to see that ship at a very, very long range, way further than you should be able to see it. And by that, and I know this is going to throw some people, nobody likes hearing math. I hated math in high school, and everybody else did too. That's why the nerds, there weren't that many of them. The chess club in my school, very small. And that was the curvature of the Earth, if you believe mainstream science. It's not what we talk about, the flat Earth people. Mainstream science says it's about 8 inches per mile squared, which means it is 8 inches times every mile times itself. So it's not like going down stairs where it's like 8 inches per mile forever. That's just a slope. You've got to adjust it for a curve. So at 2 miles, it's 2 times 2, which is 4, times 8 inches is 32. 3 times 3 is 9, times 8 is 72. And it just gets worse from there, to the point where when you do like 50 miles, it's 50 times 50 times 8 inches, which is 1,680 feet, roughly. And that's a long way. That's 1,680 feet, which means if you have an object 1,680 feet high, at 50 miles, you shouldn't be able to see it because it's on the other side of the curvature. It's on the other side of the hill you're trying to look on, the other side of. But yet, the Chicago skyline, that's just one of many all around the world. You can see these things. And everyone says, well, it's mirage. It's mirage. It's not real. It's like, well, that's not necessarily true, because I've interviewed people that deal with high-end military technology that says they're painting targets at 60 miles and beyond that are way lower than 1,000 feet. They're barely even 100 feet off the water.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, even the curvature. So that's the second question that I throw at people, which is, where is the curvature of the Earth? Tell me, if you had to grab the average person off the street, without any limit to money or time, how would you show them the curvature of the Earth? And they can't. Nobody can. Everyone keeps backing up the same. Well, you have to take a rocket ship. You have to take a book a flight with NASA. It's like, okay, you see, everyone keeps coming back to the same group. It's always the same group. It's always NASA. People say, no, there's other space agencies out there. It's like, well, no, because NASA was first, and they were the ones that built the architecture. And all these other space agencies, JAXA, the European Space Agency, the Chinese, the Russians, they all report to the same people. And it just gets. I know I go off on rants, but that's where it really starts getting interesting.
It's wonderful that you go off on a rant. How often do you get a chance to do that with this sort of subject?
Not that often, believe it or not.
All right. why then. Well, fascinating because there are so many people who have done studies, and the bubbles coming out of the space helmet, things that just don't add up. It's over the top. And the cloud structures. There's so many different things that we've seen and that you've brought forward. If I had not seen the 200 proofs, I don't think that I would really have been convinced yet. But it was all in one great package for me. And that led me to the answer of the question of, please, God, explain to me why you're saying there's four corners of the earth. And that was his answer.
The 200 proofs, which was, when I did the Flat Earth Clues, and then Rob Skiba comes in and he starts looking at it from a scriptural point of view, because the religious sector, and I did a whole clue based on it, because organized religion has a real stake in this, because it gives them a huge amount of leverage against mainstream science, because everything will break down if we are in, and for those of you, and I know I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, don't know exactly what we're talking about. What we're basically talking about is a Truman Show type environment, old school Genesis firmament, where a barrier that separates the waters below and the waters above, which is basically that the Earth is not a sphere in any way, shape, or form. It is a flat, enclosed structure with the stars and the sun and the moon very, very close, that are inside, no different than a planetarium. And to do that, you have to. Unfortunately, you're going to have to give up everything that you've been taught up until this point. Everything about solar systems, and galaxies, and how the sun works and how the moon works. It's all wrong. It all was wrong to begin with, and I believe the secret societies knew for the longest time, but they couldn't prove it until you had the technology to actually go out and test the barrier itself, meaning go out to Antarctica or go up high enough to see if there was a firmament. You're not going to know anything, which meant until the internal combustion engine was developed in the early 1900s, you didn't even have the ability to do anything, to go to any altitude or really go against the elements. So when they figured it out, and basically the premise of everything I've done is, when they figured it out back in about 1956, the nations, the top nations that survived World War II, meaning the Soviet Union and the United States, they basically became an alliance, a secret alliance that said, you know what, ruling the world is one thing, but we cannot let this thing get out. We basically wouldn't, they were wrong about, the global model was wrong, but they weren't going to tell the population, because it would have been, they thought there would have been a lot of chaos, and they wouldn't be able to, a huge paradigm shift, and a huge spiritual shift, and they didn't want to do it. And I know that I was a little bold in one of my clues when I called it, they are hiding God. But
I think it's true, though.
Yeah,
only because
really, when you boil it down, it really does point to that, and that is, if you had proof of intelligent design, and I'm not necessarily saying the handprint of God on a wall, but if you had something like that, wouldn't the public have a right to know? And I know that sounds silly. It's like, well, there you go, the people have a right to know. Well, no, actually, the people do have a right to know this, because everybody entertains the thought, and that is, where are we? Why am I here? What is the meaning of life? And this goes a long way to start answering those questions. And they decide to cover it up and says, you know what, this is our secret. It's not yours, and we're going to hold on to it for as long as we can. And here we are in 2016, and it's starting to break down.
Yes, and it's wonderful, because what was being hidden might have been land. It might have started with Elizabeth back in, the Renaissance times, and it was held because there are those that like to control. That is who it is. Those who just prefer to control and want to have some reason to laugh at you because it makes them feel okay. And it's very sad that they don't have something of their own. But to keep everyone from a truth, we can also boil down to the fact that this planisphere is the same that you would find in Midgard with the Norse legends. You can see the same thing in India, all over the world. 500 years ago, everyone knew the Earth was flat, and it wasn't until it was forced on the people that it was something other than, probably because there was a vested interest of some sort. And we see that with Admiral Byrd interview. And it leads to many more questions, but the wonderful thing is that